Hi, and welcome to another exciting episode of, I suppose, exploring data through with Agronometrics. Let's call it that. So, in this episode, what I want to look at is a question that's been brought up to me several times, and that we keep on answering is, on one hand, how much do you trust the data that you're working with? On the other hand, how does, for example, the global trade data compare to other sources such as the USDA data? USDA Market News publishes volumes and pricing, which we make available through Agronometrics as well. Many people know us for that. And then we're in the process of rolling out the global trade data, which collects import and export data from all around the world, including the United States. So in this case, what we're going to look at is the import and export data through the global trade data system and how that compares to the USDA data that we traditionally work with. So we have two dashboards that kind of give an overview of what's going on within each market. They both have a lot of charts. For example, we can look at the global trade data system. We see the volumes by origin. So these are arrivals in imports into the US by origin. We've got the last 10 years. We've got this season compared to the last 4 seasons, reviewing a lot of the information that we saw in the previous video about Peru. After we get through volumes, we have the same information for pricing. And then finally, value. So this is very useful information. It gives you a good idea of what's going on in the market, what the trends are, how pricing is going this year compared to previous years, so on and so forth. Then we have the USDA data made available through the market updates. Here we have similar information. So we got prices and volume. We've got pricing by origin this season compared to the last 4 seasons, volumes by origin, and then this season's volumes compared to the last 4 seasons. So what's the difference? I think there's a couple really big ones. On one hand, the information made available by the USDA has much lower resolution or higher resolution. I'm not really sure what the technical term is, but the information available by the USDA is made available daily. So we can look at the pricing daily, we can look at the volumes daily. For the sake of ease of use and because it's kind of the industry standard, what we've done is consolidated this into weekly inputs. What we have in the global trade data is monthly data. That is the highest resolution that the service makes available. That's for both pricing and volume. We can see in the volumes, we have imports from their by origin, by trade partner. In the USDA, we've got not only the imports by trade partners, so here's Peru, here's Mexico, but we also have all the national production, North Carolina, Michigan, Florida, so on and so forth. That's a pretty big deal. Not the final difference, but the timeliness of the information is also a really big deal. So in the global trade data, we have available information till August. And in the USDA, we have basically information available from yesterday, which is incredibly privileged to have that resolution of information for any market in the world. Fortunately, this is also the biggest market in the world. So we really like the USDA data. It's fantastic. What is it missing? So there's two things that are very useful about the global trade data that are not available in USDA. One of them is exports. So we've got the same information the last 18 months, the last 10 years, and this season compared to the last 4 seasons in exports from the US. be that in volumes or pricing. And that's a very useful thing of the global trade data. It gives you a good idea of what the role of the US production is outside of its own borders. The USDA does not make that information available. And the last part is completeness. So we'll go back to imports. And we have to kind of play with the data a little bit to be able to better explain what we mean by completeness, or what I mean by completeness. So what we're gonna do is start playing with this data. In this case, we're looking specifically at volumes. In the next video, we're gonna look at pricing, because otherwise these are gonna be way too long. So what we need to do is to convert this USDA data, which we have available weekly and with all these other origins, into something that we can easily compare to the global trade data. So the way that we're going to do this is clicking on this chart link, which we make available through the global trade data in this cool little button. And that takes you to our data navigation tool. We have the same information available for the USDA. So we're going to click this open a live version of this chart. And that allows us to jump into this view. So here we got the last 78 weeks. Here are the last 18 months. These are meant to be somewhat equivalent. So the first thing we need to do is convert this information into monthly data. That way we'll get that much closer to comparing apples to apples. We can do that by going to period and monthly. And voila, there we go. So now these charts start to look a little bit more similar. That there's obviously a big difference. You have these big valleys in the global trade data that are just not present in the USDA data. And that's because the USDA data includes all of their local production. So we need to separate that out. The way that we make that available through Agronometrics is by separating the imports from domestic production under the filter that is called trade flow. So we can go compare by trade flow. And that's going to compare basically the imports from the exports. And that starts to make these charts that much more similar. So we're going to go back to comparing by origin. And then we're going to go to the trade flow filter and only look at imports. And that gives us this chart. And so now the apples are closer to the blueberries are closer to the blueberries in this chart. You start to see a lot of similarities between them, as it were. To be able to get a good idea of what we meant by completeness, though, we don't want to just look at the last year. Actually, we need to go back in time. And so we're going to look at all of the history of the information that we have, because it's easy, we can, and I like kind of showing off what this service can do. So we're going to go to viewing. Well, first of all, we're going to go to compare yearly data, because otherwise it's going to be a big mess. But in this case, yearly is going to give us the information that we need. And we want to compare months 7 to 6. So that allows us to add all of the counter-cyclical production together. It's going to add all of the volumes from July to June. So that gets us a pretty good idea of how one export season has developed compared to another export season. The same filters are available with the USDA. And then lastly, we're going to go to custom resolution and type in the last 14 years, which throws everything back till 2010. And voila. This is like the cooking show of data. I already kind of have everything set up, so it helps me build the narratives before I actually start speaking to the camera, which I don't do perfectly, but you do the best you can. And this is the exact same thing for the USDA. So USDA on the right-hand side, global trade data on the left-hand side. We can see that they're relatively similar charts. There are some key differences. And this is what we refer to by completeness of the data. So we're going to go ahead and isolate the information that we have for Peru. And this is going to give us an interesting perspective because these lines are not the same. And there's good reason as to why they are not the same. On the right-hand side, we can see the general trend is very similar. You get to see the first increases in production in 2015-16, and then this slowly goes up until the volumes that we have today. In the USDA data, this seems choppier, and it is choppier. The biggest difference coming in 2019 and 2020, as well as 2020, 2021. And if anybody remembers what was going on around that time as far as data, there was a really, really big issue that was very pertinent to blueberry data, and that was the 201 investigation. Through that investigation, we discovered that the USDA, which was using the phytosanitary services to be able to collect their data, was collecting very, very timely data, but it was unfortunately incomplete. So we're making these kind of comparisons, and that's how from US Customs, which reports everything that comes in to the global trade data system, we have 77,000 metric tons. And then in the USDA, we're reporting 58,000 metric tons. That's short. The number that I would believe here is definitely the global trade data. When you also look at Peruvian exports, these are much closer numbers. Since the 201 investigation, they fixed that. And that's how we get to 2021, 2022 with 103,000 metric tons. And for all intents and purposes, no two data sets will ever be perfect, but we have really similar numbers from the USDA. And that extends into the latest data that we have for the 2022-2023 season, which are very similar numbers. So this is a quick overview of looking at the volumes, looking at the differences between the USDA data that we make available through the market updates and the import data that we make available through the Global Trade Data Service. There's another component of this, that's the pricing. And that's actually something we're going to go ahead and cover in the next video. So stay tuned and we'll keep on diving into the data and trying to help explain what this is, what's going on with it, and how to use it as best we can, or how serious do you take it. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon.